And as we know, the scale of the human suffering, both on October 7th and as we've been discussing in the months since in Gaza, is staggering. After 1,200 Israelis were killed and 240 were kidnapped, over 30,000 people killed in Gaza, large proportion of them women and children. We know all this and we've just been discussing it. We've also talked about the aid agencies, which are warning of extreme child malnutrition. As you can see here in these pictures, the reality is devastating. While UNICEF reports that over 1,000 children have had one or both legs amputated. Meantime, inside Israel, the wounds of October 7th have not healed, and over 100 hostages are still held inside Gaza. And this week, after a visit to Israel and the West Bank, a UN team reported, quote, convincing information that hostages have been sexually assaulted. They also found reasonable grounds to believe that sexual violence was committed during the Hamas attack. And they heard, quote, concerns raised over cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment of Palestinians in detention, including sexual violence. So what does each side know of the other's deep wounds and ongoing trauma? How does coverage differ in Arab and Israeli media? Oren is an Israeli journalist for the investigative magazine The Seventh Eye. And Dalia Hatuka is an independent Palestinian journalist. They are both joining me now, and we're very grateful to have you on the program. I'm not sure whether you were able to listen to caretaker Prime Minister Shtaya from Ramallah. But let me ask you, Oren, first. When you hear that and when you see what's going on and the pictures we have just been airing as we introduced you, how much of that perspective is the Israeli public seeing or hearing?
Well, very little. Unfortunately, I think your viewers, even if they are thousands of miles away, see more of those pictures than people here in Tel Aviv, which is a couple of hours' drive from Gaza. It's not just the perspective, it's just data, it's information. It's natural for a country to show its perspective of an ongoing war, but the Israeli public almost doesn't have any numbers presented to them. Not to mention human stories and emotional stories about what's going on in Gaza.
And why do you think that is, Oren?
Well, it's not an official censorship, it's sort of a self-censorship. I think most of the Israeli public doesn't want to know, and most of the Israeli mainstream media outlets, not all of them, but most of them, don't want to upset the public and also feel the same way. I think the feeling is that if we know what's going on, the terrible human cost of the people in Gaza, if we know about that, it would maybe diminish or hurt the war effort. If we feel mercy for the other side, we might not be as united as we should be during a time of war. I think that's the logic.
Mm-hmm. Dalia Hatuka, can I turn to you, also an independent journalist? What is your media showing, but basically how are you projecting what's happening in Gaza right now?
Well, I think that Palestinians have been covering the war very intensively. I think they have been following not only Palestinian journalists who are on the ground, who have become sort of everyone's eyes and ears to what's going on in Gaza, because of the fact that international media has been forbidden by Israeli authorities from accessing Gaza. And Gaza's journalists, continue to bear the burden of reporting on what's happening there until the point that they no longer can. I think also in terms of Israeli media, Palestinians follow Israeli media very diligently. We have experts in Hebrew-speaking media, courtesy of having spent time in Israeli jails. We're talking about an estimated 1 million Palestinians who were arrested since Israel occupied East Jerusalem, the Gaza Strip, and the West Bank in '67. But we also have people who are deeply immersed in Israeli politics. Palestinians follow Israeli TV shows. So there is this sort of unrequited love, I would say. Israelis could care less about what's going on with Palestinians. I don't think they're as affected. They don't follow Palestinian media like Palestinians consume Israeli media. Even when there are investigations to push Israelis to think, like, for example, the piece written in the magazine 972 about Israeli airstrikes on non-military targets and the use of artificial intelligence to do so, it's the people on the outside that are following, and not necessarily ordinary Israelis.